evening. Thank you so much for coming to the fifth event of our symposium. Tonight's event is titled Exploitation of Native American Sacred Sites. So we have a variety of great distinguished panelists this evening. And first of all, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Professor Dean Saitta, and then he will further introduce our panelists this evening. So Dr. Saitta is a professor of anthropology and chair of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Denver, where he teaches evolutionary anthropology, urban anthropology, and archaeology. Dr. Saitta's research interests are in North American archaeology, labor history, and comparative architectural and urban form. He has researched social change in the ancient Zuni society of West Central New Mexico, where he directed DU archaeological field schools throughout the 1990s. He is also the co-director of the Colorado Coal Field War Archaeological Project. This is the first systematic effort to excavate sites associated with the 1913 to 1914 Southern Colorado coal field strike, including the Ludlow Tent Colony. He's also a member of the John Evans Study Committee, which investigates how DU's founder was connected to the events of the St. Massacre. So with that, I will pass it over to Professor Dean Saitta.
Okay, thanks, Laurel. And thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be here and to moderate this panel. I'm going to give a brief introduction of each of the panelists, and then they'll take as much or as little time as they need to communicate their message for this session. And then we'll throw it open to a conversation. Perhaps the panelists will want to ask questions of each other, but certainly we want to get the audience involved as well, which I assume is in keeping with the week's activities for this symposium. So first off, and this will be in the order of their speaking, I want to introduce Kaden Walksnice. Kaden is a member of the Northern Cheyenne tribe from Lame Deer, Montana. He's a member of the Northern Cheyenne Native Youth Alliance, Leadership Alliance, and a co-founder of the EcoCheyenne, a group committed to protecting the Northern Cheyenne homeland from coal mining while also promoting sustainable and renewable energy. He has a particular interest in the preservation of cultural resources as part of his work. He's a society warrior of the Crazy Dog Society. He's also a wildlands firefighter for the Northern Cheyenne Fire Protection Department, which I thought was pretty interesting and certainly good work. He's also a descendant of a survivor of the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, and he's worked at the Sand Creek National Historic Site and been involved in the annual spiritual healing run from the site to Denver. So welcome, Cade. Next is Andy Reid. Andy is an adjunct professor in the Stern College of Law. He teaches courses in environmental justice and ethics and the human rights law of Indigenous peoples. There's a lot of activism in Andy's past. Just one example, in 1978 he served as staff counsel to a coalition of Native American, environmental, and peace activists in South Dakota called the Black Hills Alliance, which successfully challenged the planned wholesale mining of the Black Hills for uranium by a consortium of multinational energy corporations. This was an early example of the environmental justice, environmental racism controversies. And if you want to get more poop on Andy, just go to his webpage for the Stern College of Law, where you can read about other activist ventures that he's been involved in. So welcome to Andy. And then finally, last but not least, my colleague in anthropology, Richard Clemmer-Smith. He's professor of anthropology at DU. He's one of several authors of the report that came out this year about DU and the Sand Creek Massacre, and wrote probably the signature piece of research that anchors that report, which looks at our founder's relationship to his position as territorial governor and superintendent of Indian Affairs compared to other superintendents of Indian Affairs who were active in the West. Richard has served as an expert witness for the United States Department of Justice in several Native American lands claims cases for the Shoshone and Paiute tribes, and he's provided reports in what was a famous land dispute between the Navajo and Hopi from the 1990s. Richard did a lot of heavy lifting in terms of reporting on that dispute for the American Anthropological Association. He's well published and widely respected for his scholarship on Indigenous land claims and human rights. So that's a quick and dirty on each of them, and with that, I think I'll invite Kaden to be our first speaker.
Okay. Well, I'm just gonna sit here and hopefully, can you guys hear me good? Okay. So my Cheyenne name is Nissa Ayo, which is 20 stands, and I come from the Nahuptamsalt Crazy Dog Society. And my focus is on really Cheyenne culture preservation, cultural sites, and mentioning of Sand Creek is that's an area of focus for me, is Sand Creek. I'm a survivor descendant. Everybody here should know a little bit about Sand Creek. You're at DU, so you guys should know about Sand Creek. If you don't, look it up, look into the details, educate yourself on that. Then I was going to start off with this question is, who in here has bought a gas station artifact, a dream catcher, or something of a Native American mirror hanger? You seen them? You bought one? Exploitation right there. It can generate some income for the person who made it, but you know, for us, for myself, that's exploiting our culture, exploiting the ceremonies we do at these sites. I have thought about buying some of that stuff too myself, but I looked at it and then think about what my grandfather would say or something. So, and I just wanted to really mention, kind of talk about, we got done with the Sand Creek Massacre Spiritual Healing Run in 2013, and we went back to Billings. We had kind of a briefing meeting for the entire event. And it was held with our tribal representatives, Sand Creek representatives, and the National Park Service. We had the superintendent from Sand Creek and Bensel Fort, which is Dr. Alexa Roberts. She was there. Superintendent Reid Robinson from Devil's Tower came in. And I think it's Denise Swink from Little Bighorn came in. And they wanted to meet with the tribal representatives and Sand Creek reps on some ideas. I think the younger audience, I don't know how to say that, the famous musicians Daft Punk, their producer actually came in. We were meeting on Sand Creek, and so the producer came in. He wanted to speak to us representatives about Daft Punk hosting a concert at Devil's Tower. And they wanted to establish laser lights and make to be what he would kind of call spiritual next awakening, a revolution. And so at that moment, we just greeted him. He was nervous. There was a room of brown-skinned people, only a couple park superintendents and his producer come walking in. He was shaking. He was scared to even get up to his feet. But at the end, all of us respected him for at least coming in and asking us at that time. It was just the Cheyenne tribe. Later on, after that meeting, they consulted with other tribes that are affected by Devil's Tower. I believe there's 16 different tribes that take that mountain as a sacred mountain. And so they consulted. The concert was denied. Everything was denied because that was our mountain, that was our sacred mountain. And actually, that mountain, Devil's Tower, is connected to the Big Dipper. That's how, for our Cheyenne and our Cheyenne way, the Big Dipper was created from that mountain. There's 7 stars in that sky, the Big Dipper, and those are Cheyennes up there. they're placed up there in the sky from that mountain. That mountain is actually the remains of a tree trunk from an event that happened centuries ago. So that's one kind of story we get from there. There's another story with it, which can't really tell at the moment. But the concert, so the concert was denied. We respected them for coming in and asking. And we tried to ask for the help in getting other issues out, but they didn't want to do anything besides host a concert there. And we tried to simply explain to them what that mountain meant to us, but they didn't understand. They just wanted to host a concert there on the summer tour, make money, and leave. They didn't have at that time they came to us, they didn't have no management plan for post-concert. They didn't have no management plan for how are they going to facilitate all these people coming in. They wanted 50,000 plus people at that concert in an area that there's no hotels in a 70-mile radius. And so that's kind of one. I just wanted to mention that one. Another one is Bear Butte. I don't know if you guys know where Bear Butte is. That's in South Dakota. And that is our other sacred mountain that is getting affected annually by the Sturgis Bike Rally. Thousands of people go there, bikers, and alcohol is there, drugs, and all kinds of other things going on around that area. And that mountain to us is where we get our Cheyenne, that's where we get our governance. That is where our laws come from and how we are Cheyenne today. One of our Cheyenne men, our prophets, actually went inside there. It's a mountain now shaped as a teepee. Back then it was one. He was taken in there. He was taught these laws. He was taught what we know now as Cheyenne culture, Cheyenne traditional laws. And he came out and he taught that to the rest of the tribe. And when he came out, the teepee formed into a mountain and closed itself up. And today, we go and hold ceremonies there. We hold a fasting ceremony. And actually, I'm trying to do mine this summer, so I'm preparing myself to go there this summer. And it's a tough thing to do. And it's what we do as Cheyennes. That's our way of life. That's where our culture comes from. And the thing that's affecting it is that bike rally. The alcohol, drugs, people, commotion that's around that mountain. Before Sturgis was there, it was quiet, nothing there, it's peaceful. Sturgis Valley came in, commotion. One of my grandfathers, he was an elder, he passed, and he stated to one of my uncles that they're leaving that mountain. It's too noisy, they're leaving that mountain. What he meant by that is the spirits that come from there, the spirits that gave us our governance and our laws, they're moving, they're going somewhere else, where it's more quiet. We don't know where. They're just going on their own, not telling us anything. So what we're trying to do now is protect that area, protect that land again, so we can continue to make that connection with where we got our governance from, where we got our laws from, to keep our people safe, to keep our people together. Currently, our tribe owns maybe 3/4 of the land around that mountain. The other 1/4 is the Lakota tribes. They own a portion of that. And so we're making some ways to protecting the area. We can't do anything about the bike rally, but we're trying to protect our area as best we can. The other more recent, well, I guess they're all still in the same issue at the same time. But me, my aunt, and a couple others are actually fighting the co-development on Cheyenne homelands. We just had our commemoration last weekend of one of our chiefs that led us back up from Oklahoma to Montana 136 years ago. They left Oklahoma. 300 of them left Oklahoma, started trekking back to Montana. And between Oklahoma and Montana, they encountered 14,000 U.S. cavalry troops. 150 some made it back to Montana, to our homelands that we have now. We made our way back. We made our way past those 14,000 troops. And that was after Sand Creek. We came back north in 1879. Sand Creek was in 1864. So the area that we're trying to protect that coal mine from is the area that we went back to 136 years ago, where our chiefs led us, where our ancestors died for us to have that land. And these coal companies are trying to come in, dig the coal up, sell it to what we think, well, Asia, the coal exports, and that's all they want to do is just come in, sell that land. So we're fighting against that. Yeah, kind of go off the so we had our commemoration last week, 136 years. And we had a victory dance for chief that led us back, our ancestors that came back, that made it through that 14,000 U.S. troops. And we're continuing to fight against the coal. Actually, just right before this, I was in a cyber cafe typing away, trying to do a letter to the editor of our state newspaper, because our state representative is meeting with the tribes against EPA regulations and he's actually a proponent for the exports of coal development. It's a fight. But those two I really wanted to mention to you: Sturgis, Bear Butte, Daft Punk, Devil's Tower. Those are my two examples of exploitation, really. And if you guys think of anything, I'll be here, small anything. But that's it for the moment. Thank you.
Somebody's got the PowerPoint. While she's getting set up, I'll preface my presentation by saying I'm going to take a little different approach. I looked at the title of the panel, Exploitation of Native American Sacred Sites, and I come from a background of liberation struggles of Indigenous peoples, and the protection of sacred sites, from my experience, is part and parcel of that process of liberation. In other words, words, it's a struggle for decolonization. Indigenous peoples are colonized peoples, at least that's my perspective. I'm looking at with Indigenous communities now for about 40 years. I teach the Indigenous Peoples course at the law school. I also teach environmental ethics and so forth. And one thing that, and I'll end my presentation, hopefully if I can get to that point, by kind of showing the overlap. I get the impression probably a few people in here are Native American or Indigenous. And so hopefully I can try to make the presentation a little relevant, besides being outsiders, the reason why these issues are important for those of us who are not Native American. So I'm going to try to bring that back. I've got experience in a number of different struggles involving sacred sites, and I'll run through some of those and just generally to start them as a background. And but then what I really like to do is to tie them in to, I assume most of you are from Corval, some are from maybe the law school, a few people. I don't see any of my students in here. I told them, they said they were going to come. See them in here and I'm keeping track. But anyway, and hopefully this could, if you've been attending some of the other presentations, I know the one with Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, this will follow up from some of what she's been doing through the International Indian Treaty Council and others in trying to get international recognition, you apply international law because it's a colonization situation. And the way the United States has gotten around its responsibilities to Indigenous people is by creating a branch of law, they call it federal Indian law, which they created out of whole cloth in 1823 with the decisions of the Chief Justice John Marshall. And they created it just for Indigenous peoples, for Indian people in this country. So what happens is you have, they're the only group of people in this country that are treated differently than everybody else. First off, they don't come under the Constitution. There's only a couple of provisions in the Constitution even mention Indian people. And so since they don't fall in the Constitution, they don't have the protections of the Bill of Rights, for example. They have this nation-to-nation relationship, which puts them under what we call a dependent domestic nation relationship, where the federal government has assumed authority over them in order to protect them. But it's used as a pretext in order to exploit them. And that's the context of kind of my presentation today. But anyway, there is one of the big changes, and we're really at a sea change in terms of these concepts. The sea change is going beyond the domestic laws of the colonial occupier, the colonial court system, which is the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. government, federal government, exercising plenary power over Indigenous peoples. We're going beyond that. They've gone to the United Nations, and now we're really having a sea change where we're seeing international human rights law being applied. For those that are interested, one of the best reviews of this issue, I think, is a book by Winona LaDuke, who came out of the American Indian movement and went to Harvard and is now a grandmother up in Minnesota doing some great food sovereignty work up there with the White Reservation up there. But anyway, so I'm just going to run through these. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but just to mention some of the international human rights laws now that are being applied to Indigenous peoples. The first one, obviously, is the Universal Declaration. Then there's the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. The United States has signed and ratified that treaty. And so it is being used now by Indigenous peoples to enforce their rights, including their sacred rights. And it's this collective right to equal protection that brings them under this act, because they're discriminated against collectively as a race. Then you have the International Convention on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, which the United States has not signed for the very specific reason that they don't want to guarantee, number one, economic rights to anyone, and they also don't want to guarantee cultural rights to anyone, because they would be in trouble when it comes to the United States. Then you have the ILO Convention 169, which is really the first international document dealing with Indigenous peoples. On the regional level, you have the American Declaration of Rights and Duties of Man. Now, this is the key document that's now being used by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is the human rights body that deals with the issues of Indigenous peoples for the Americas. Right? They're like the UN of the Americas. The United States comes under them. They have jurisdiction over the United States. So there are actions being brought in that venue against the United States. There's a recent one that was filed by the Onondagas in New York on their land rights, and I'll talk about one in a little bit about that was brought by the Western Shoshone. Then there's the Convention on the Prevention of Genocide. The one thing a lot of people don't understand, those that are not familiar with the convention, is that genocide doesn't just mean killing somebody. You can commit genocide by killing their identity, which is what the process is with Indigenous people. Through forced assimilation, which federal Indian law is a law of forced assimilation. I call it the law of slow genocide. And all of federal Indian law has been built around 200 years of policy of forcing the assimilation of Indigenous people, to make them non-Indian. We set up Indian schools, we kidnapped Indian kids, put them in white homes for 100 years, and so forth. We sterilized Indian women. There are all different ways in which the United States government has committed, I think, a violation of this convention. It wasn't in existence at the time of a lot of these, but some of these, including the sterilization of Indian women and the kidnapping of Indian children, occurred after the convention was enacted. Interestingly, the United States has refused to sign this one as well for obvious reasons. They don't want to admit the history of genocide. If you study genocide, there's one of the interesting areas that they study is this concept of denial, and that the perpetrators of genocide oftentimes create a situation of denial. We've seen that most recently. If you remember, there were some issues about the AP program and about how the conservatives, right wing in this country, did not like the AP program being taught in our schools. What brought that about is that the AP program was teaching the children that the United States had committed genocide against Indigenous peoples. And that's what created the discussion of that. They did not want that taught to the American children. So you can have cultural genocide. It is a genocide. Then another law that's, I think, we're transitioning in terms of this area where there's now getting recognition and admissions of these violations of Indigenous peoples now. We're entering into a new area which I call what is known as restorative justice. And restorative justice includes various things. It includes things, something you may have heard of, truth and reconciliation. So you have truth and reconciliation commissions. There's one that went on in Canada recently over the kidnapping of Indigenous children, putting them in schools. There's been one in Australia and some other places. A big one in South Africa after the revolution. And it's a chance to kind of clear the air and start to deal with some of these remedies. One of the big remedies that's coming out of some of that is this concept of reparation. And there's a whole international law of reparations. This is a document up there where there's guidelines set out by the United Nations on how you go about reparations. Reparations be everything from repatriating artifacts and bones that were stolen from the Indigenous peoples to things like returning land. The return of land is a reparation. And so we have this concept of healing. So it's this process of healing. And so we're actually entering into a discussion now within the international community about how do we heal the damage that we did. And it's interesting because it fits very well within Indigenous concepts. The Navajo, the Dene have a whole process of healing that's integrated into a third part of their court system. So you don't just bring a criminal case or a civil case, but you also have to go through this whole healing process, which is a completely separate and required process that they have within their tribe, and it's actually studied internationally as a way of an alternative way of approaching conflict resolution. So restorative justice is the healing of the effects of the crime. It's the crime of genocide, the crime of ethnocide, and all sorts of restorative justice. It's called you fight for your existence, you resist colonial occupation, you indigenize, which means getting back your identity and preserving your identity, and then you decolonize. Now you can colonize in various ways. You can occupy a territory like Israel and Palestine, or there's also colonization of the mind, convincing somebody that they're inferior. In many countries, Indigenous peoples are afraid to call themselves Indigenous peoples. They call themselves farmers. So when you see the term campesinos, that's usually an Indigenous person. In Puerto Rico, the Indigenous people are considered to be wiped out, but that's because they call themselves farmers. There's still a number of Indigenous people that actually survived the genocide of Columbus in the late 1400s and 1500s in Puerto Rico and other places, the tiny. So I consider all of this then as process of decolonization. You're dealing with, this is the process of decolonization. So there's decolonizing the Americas. This is a quote from Evo Morales, who's a current president of the plurinational state of Bolivia. Plurinational meaning that it's composite of indigenous nations. It's a composite, it's like a federation of various groups. It's not a central dominant authority over everybody. And that was created through a new constitution that was passed after he took power. And he's saying we are starting a process of decolonization in Bolivia. All this is bringing about change, and we will continue. What it's referring to is that after over 500 years, Bolivia is still a colonized country. You're still dealing with the colonization of Bolivia first by the Spanish and so forth, and then by the United States of America, and then by transnational corporations. So one of the ways that they decolonize, for example, is by nationalizing their natural resources and by taking control. You'll know right now that there's a battle between Obama and the state of Venezuela right now over this very issue. Obama wishes to exercise authority over the democratic processes in Venezuela, and he's not having much success. He's calling them a threat. So we have to decolonize the United States, to decolonize Canada, and that's, I mentioned the Truth and Reconciliation process. It's usually 4 parts. And part of that's reclaiming the cultural heritage, getting return of the land, decolonizing the racism that exists within society. So it means not only decolonizing the psychological impact on indigenous peoples, but it means colonizing the people that have the racism ingrained within themselves. All non-Indians. We are a racist culture. We are a racist society. And that's quite clear. Most people don't think of themselves as racist, but if you grew up in the United States, I can almost guarantee you are racist in one way or another. When out of law school, when I was a second-year law student, I did a summer internship up in Wisconsin. And you'll see that square near the top, that's the Menominee Indian Reservation. If you fly over Wisconsin, you'll see a big area that's all green. Everywhere else it's been trees have all been cut down. That's the Menominee Indian Reservation. It's the only place where they have the old-growth forest in Wisconsin. And they did that through sustainable practices, sustainable lumbering. Well, they were terminated in the 1950s and had to fight to get their reservation back, to get their identity back. They were terminated as an indigenous peoples in an attempt to forced assimilation. It was a program that they tried to apply in the 1950s without much success. But with the Wisconsin tribe in the Menominees it was. So I went up there to fight. They were trying to impose a neo-colonial government, a corporate form of government, non-traditional government, on the indigenous people. It was actually being pushed on them by the Native American Rights Fund out of Boulder. So they were using so-called progressive or enlightened Native lawyers themselves, which were funded by Ford Corporation and other major multinational corporations, heavily funded to push what was essentially corporate or white forms of government onto the indigenous peoples. They created a civil war within the Menominee Indian reservations. There were people that died, many people were beat up, but it was all funded by the federal government and state governments. And so I went up with to work with the traditional people and the warrior societies to try to stop this from happening. After several years, we were able to get a federal court to declare that the appointed government was illegal, and also to force an election on the Constitution, and they got a traditional general council form. So on the Menominees, they have a river running through called the Wolf River. They're known as the sturgeon people, and the sturgeon was part of their culture, is how they identified themselves, along with wild rice. And 125 years earlier, they started damming up the river. And because they dammed up the river, the sturgeon couldn't go forward. So for 125 years, the Menominees were deprived of the very thing that identified themselves. They have a fish dance, which is up here, which they use to talk about the gathering of the sturgeon and the harvest and so forth. After 125 years, they were able to correct this problem, and they were able to get the sturgeon to come upstream, and now have a sturgeon harvest on the reservation. Those are some kids working on it. They have a powwow and a sturgeon, and they feast there. And so it's a way, this is part of the decolonization process that I'm talking about. The other problem that happened when they terminated is a lot of the reservation, which were the marshes, were sold off and created into lakes, which are known as legend lakes. And so the wealthy people from Milwaukee go up there and stay in their summer cabins. they weren't able to preserve that land and get it back, so they're still on Indian land in that area. But that area is considered sacred to the Menominees because it's a part of the Menominee Reservation where they would say the earth would heal itself through the marches, and it's a way that the earth would cleanse itself. Then above the Menominee Indian Reservation, there's a place called the Mole Lake Skokagan Reservation, and there they. I also worked on that one when I was there. They're known as the Wild Rice people, and their identity is built around the harvest and use of wild rice on the sacred Mole Lake, which is on the reservation. Well, it turns out that in the 1970s, Anaconda Copper found a world-class copper deposit right underneath the lake, and wanted to mine it. And world-class meaning that it was so big it would affect the world price of copper. And it was under the lake, and so as a law student, I did the initial land title work on the lake, on the minerals underneath the lake for the Mole Lake people. There was a big battle with Crandon Mine. Exxon eventually bought it, and they ended up combining with the local community and kicking out the Exxon Copper, the Crandon Mine. And they ended up deeding over this world-class mineral deposit for $100 to the tribe. In 2003. I was gone by then, so it was a victory that they did on their own. And it was a major deal. And it's written about. There's a good book on some of these struggles you can read about if you're interested in the cross-cultural things, because you can have things. One of the areas that I worked a lot in is where you have traditional foes, usually the ranchers and the Indians, and sometimes the Indians and the environmentalists. Believe it or not, Indians and environmentalists are almost always on opposite sides when it comes to litigation and things like that. There's a lot of arrogance in the environmental community, and I've worked in the environmental community, towards the rights of indigenous peoples. And so what we worked a lot at was bringing these land-based peoples together in common struggle. And Al Gaddix in his book here, Resource Rebels, talks about that, including, he talks about the Crandon struggle as well as the struggles in the Black Hills. After that, I went over to the Black Hills to work with the American Indian Movement on defending the Black Hills from massive uranium plans to end taconite mining of the Black Hills. As everyone probably has already knows, the Black Hills are sacred to the Lakota people. They believe that that the people humans came to the earth through Wind Cave, which is in the middle of the Black Hills, from beneath the earth. And there was this big struggle. We ended up getting a lot of press internationally. And this is the group I worked with. I'm not in the picture there. Bruce Ellison is Leonard Peltier's lawyer there is, and some others. But that's the group was called Black Hills Alliance. This is a great picture of this is Air Force Base, which is right outside the Black Hills, flying over TP at the International Survival Academy. But anyway, the first case I worked on, one of the early ones, was Craven Canyon, and it has the highest number of pictographs and petroglyphs anywhere in the world, highest concentration, and it's Sacred Canyon. And they wanted to mine uranium there. And so we went to battle, and just a quick story, we were losing everything. And then a group of Indian elders came down from Standing Rock up in North Dakota and put a sweat lodge right in front of where they wanted to put the first mine. And we did a sweat, and they consecrated the ground. And so from then on, it won every single case, every single battle. And we were successful in holding them off until the bottom fell on the uranium market, and all of them left. Not a single uranium mine got started at that time. Next one we worked on was Hell's Canyon, which is a little bit to the east of Craven Canyon. Hell's Canyon was also a sacred canyon. There's a big battle. Above Hell's Canyon also is Flint Hill, which is an Aboriginal flint quarry that's world famous. Honeywell wanted to put in a guided missile testing facility where they would fly the guided weapons up the canyon. And the people from the Oglala Sioux Reservation came and did an encampment there. And we fought them, the cowboys around the neighbors, who I also worked with, we formed an alliance called the CIA, and fought them and were successful, and they left. And when they left, they created a wild horse ranch. So if you go to South Dakota and you go to the wild horse ranch, that's a result of the indigenous people fighting off Honeywell. And the state also deeded over the Flint Hill to the Lakota And they conduct the Sundance now, occasionally up there in the Black Hills now. Another one is Bear Butte, and Kaden's already talked about this, so I'll just run through the pictures here. There's a picture of the Sturgis motorcycle rally. It is horrendous. They wanted to put in by the way, a biker bar at the foot of the Sacred Mountain, and there's been protests going on in that. And Devil's Tower is another one that Kaden covered, so I'll skip over that. There was a big case that was waged over this, and there was some litigation over Bear Butte as well. The one thing I will say about these cases is that when Indigenous people file them trying to protect their religious rights, their religious rights are construed by the courts under the First Amendment as individual or civil rights, not as human rights. And because of that, they don't have a position that is different than everybody else. And so their rights are compromised. In other words, the courts will say everyone has a right to Devil's Tower, everyone has a right to Bear Butte. And so they will compromise the rights of the Indigenous peoples, even though the way that they compromise actually denies them. So the 10th Circuit denied the rights and compromised the rights of the Cheyenne and others in a case in 1999 around Devil's Tower. Crow Butte is my most recent case. I'm litigating that one right now. I'm the attorney for the Oglala Sioux tribe and working with elders up there to preserve Crow Butte. It's right below Fort Robinson. It's the area where they're doing the uranium mining, is where they did the, Chief Crazy Horse, by the way, was killed at Fort Robinson. But the uranium mining is right south of there, and it's the area where the Signer Starve happened. It's when the government was trying to get Native people to sign treaties, first to deprive them of their food sources for the buffalo by putting them essentially into concentration camps, and made them dependent on the United States for food, and then they refused to feed them until they signed treaties giving them their land. And that area south of Fort Robinson was one of the areas they did that. This is what the production site looks like. It's radioactive, and it's right at the top of the if you look on the bottom left, at the beginning of the White River. It's in Nebraska, and it flows directly into the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and so it's contaminating both the underground and surface water. These are some of the people battling over. So that's a battle I'm currently involved in. I'm in that one. It's before the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and I am raising human rights and international law on this one. Hopefully, we can create some methods. The other area I'm working in right now is at Fort Lewis College, which is out in Durango. It was originally an Army fort that was changed into an Indian school, and it's essentially an Indian college right now. There are 1,000 Indian students there from all over, and they're working to preserve the Indian graves there, which are being disturbed, but they're also working to preserve Mount Hesperus, which is one of the 4 sacred mountains of the Dene or the Navajo people. It forms the northern boundary of the traditional Dene lands. Here's a picture of it. But there's uranium mining and coal mining going on at the foot of it. Mount Taylor's at one of the other corners of the Navajo, and there's mining going on there and battles to protect Mount Taylor as well. Some protesters. And then in San Francisco Peaks, I'll spend a little more time on, is another corner. Anyone been to San Francisco Peaks to ski? It's kind of like you're skiing in the desert. Here's where it's located. You'll see the ski runs. Up to the left of the ski run is Mount Humphreys, which is a sacred mountain. And here's what it looks like. So here they are skiing. They've been fighting this battle for over 75 years to try to keep this resort off their sacred mountain. And most recently, because it's in the desert, they have to make snow. And because there's no water, they make water out of recycled water. So they're spraying recycled urine onto a sacred mountain and create this battle. So there's been an ongoing battle here to try to protect the mountain. That's a big battle. It's still going on right now. And then one of the more significant cases in recent times, and please stop me if I'm going too long.
How much? 5 minutes?
5 minutes, okay. This one is very famous because there's a gold mine being put out, a world-class gold mine underneath by Barrick Gold Mine, which is a Canadian company, and it's on Western Shoshone Treaty lands. And so there's been a battle of the Western Shoshone to fight back on this gold mine, and particularly led by these two sisters, the Dan sisters. One of them died, Mary and Carrie Dan. But they brought an action first. They went all the way to U.S. Supreme Court and then back down again, and lost. So then they filed an action with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and they got a declaration from the Human Rights Tribunal there that federal Indian law violates the human rights of indigenous peoples because it denies them equal protection, because it doesn't give them a legal remedy to get their land back. So it violates the right to property, violates the right to equal protection based on race, and it denies. So federal Indian law has been declared to be in violation of the human rights doctrines. And the specific one that they found them in violation was the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man, which the United States has signed. Yucca Mountain is another Western Shoshone battle that's been going on where they want to put a hideout on a nuclear waste dump. And then Mount Graham is another famous one where they want to put in a observatory. Vatican, of all people, have been fighting with the indigenous people over that. There's a red scroll up there, but it's sacred to the San Carlos Apache, and they believe that the spirits live there, and that if you mess with the mountain, you're going to mess with the earth, you'll mess with the you're going to create a lot of problems, with the spirit people that live there will cause problems here. And then another one I wanted to mention is the Glamis Gold Mine, which is near Yuma, Arizona. And I'll just mention this one quickly. It was also a battle involving the Quechan people and another Canadian company, Glamis Gold. And on that one, Glamis Gold was trying to use international law, the NAFTA, Native American Free Trade Agreement, arguing that their rights, commercial rights under the trade agreement, trumped federal environmental law. The indigenous people fought back on that one, and they actually won on that one. They won on environmental reasons, but not. There's the president, their tribal president fighting on Glamis Gold. And then within the last few days, actually within the last few months, there's a battle ongoing right now in Hawaii over an observatory on Mauna Kea. So that's the battle there. All right. The final one I wanted to talk about was this one in New Zealand, in the Wangari River. This one's interesting. I know we're talking about Native American battles, but this one creates a precedent for us. In this one, the indigenous people there are defining themselves by this river. They are one. They're connected. There's no distinction between them and the river. And they live on this river. They're famous for their boats. And they want to honor the treaty with the Brits. They've been having demonstrations. And they actually forced the Queen of England into signing a treaty that recognized the river itself and from its source all the way to the ocean as a living being, as a living entity. And it's the first time in history that this has been done. And so they recognize the river as a living being, and that all treaty negotiations now, they have to have a trustee of the river present that represents the interests of the river. And it creates this kind of special contracts. Yeah, finally, I brought in the 1980s, and this is kind of a tangent, but I worked for a group called Western Solidarity, which was a group of farmers and ranchers and peace activists and so forth. And we fought the deployment of the MX nuclear weapons system in Colorado back then, and in Nebraska and Wyoming. It ended up being put in near Alvin, or planned for Alvin. We called it the Dunce Pack. And this was the most destructive weapon in history. It had 10 warheads, each with 10 times the destructive power of Hiroshima. And they want to put in 100 of them in close proximity, and they all shoot up together like this. And in challenging that we brought a lawsuit in federal court where we argued, and we had native plaintiffs, including Linda Kronog and some others, that were making the argument that these missiles pose a risk to the destruction of the earth, and that the earth was sacred. So we actually argued the sacredness of the earth to the indigenous people and the standing of indigenous people to oppose this nuclear weapon system because of the risk that it posed to the earth. And so, since I'm out of time, I won't go much further except to say that from that we've been working on the rights of Mother Earth, and trying to, it's been raised in the UN climate summits in Durban and Rio, and most recently, Indigenous people have been leading this. People's Climate March, it was also raised, the Rights of Mother Earth. Ava Morales has been pushing that. It fits in well with Buddhism and in this concept that we are all one with Mother Earth. And so that, I guess that's the main point I have here. I'll get through these others. The last one, oops, gotta go back one. I have a quote here from, see if I can get it back. I have a quote here from Crazy Horse. It says, there is still the circle of heaven and earth, yet a little waiting for your people. Then what the Wasichus, which is the white man, bring will be only a bad dream that shall pass away like a shadow that has never been. In that day, some of the Wasichus too will learn the meaning of the sacred circle, and they will help your people change the earth to beauty. And hopefully we're in that process now. That's all.
I have 5 minutes. First of all, a footnote on Mount Tenebo. This is it's an even more interesting case because Barrick Gold has had this gold mine kind of at the foot of Mount Tenebo for a long time, many years. Also at the foot of Mount Tenebo is Crescent Valley where the dams live. What Barrick Gold wanted to do was go up on the top of Mount Tenebo, which is a sacred site, and the dams and some other Western tradition groups actually brought a lawsuit, a successful complaint that Barrick had not complied with the requirements for an environmental impact statement. And so they got the whole thing postponed on the basis of a technicality. So sometimes the colonist law where it does work. But I want to return a little bit to Kaden's mention of the struggle against coal companies' exploitation of Cheyenne lands, and also to Andy's mention of the concepts of indigenizing and decolonizing. And to do that, I want to share with you a couple of reflections that I sometimes share with my students. One of them is from David Bononga, who is an internationally known spokesperson for the traditional Hopi. And this was drawn from some remarks that he made many, many years ago. And this is the point. Back in 1962. And it was, the remarks were printed up, so it's from a print document. This is at a gathering of Indian brothers in the Hopi village of Hodavilla. And Hodavilla, it became renowned for being, depending on who you were, for most people, the village of Hodavilla were a collection of anti-modern kooks. They're all traditional Hopis. But the reason they got that reputation is because they opposed the installation of electricity in their village. Well, how could you possibly be against electricity? Electricity is wonderful. It's made from damming rivers and burning coal. At least it certainly was then. Okay, but so they were against it. So here are the remarks of David Monoglia. For material gains, many people have killed, lied, stolen, robbed their neighbor's property, and heaped falsehood upon their fellow beings. I'm sorry to say that your great leaders in Washington, or the White House, or the United Nations insist on making more powerful weapons of destruction. They will never bring about real peace. They will only bring about sudden deaths to all living things on earth. We firmly believe that coming together today like this is a fulfillment of one of our prophecies. That is, in these troubled times, good people of all races will seek each other and eventually unite themselves to the teachings of the Great Spirit. The people who were at this gathering were largely Native Americans. There weren't too many non-Native Americans. But this was a gathering that was hosted in the village of Hodavilla for a couple of decades. And some of the participants were from the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations, also called League of the Iroquois, and from other nations as well. The next one is from Thomas Bangaka, who was also a spokesperson. For more than 20 years, he was an interpreter and spokesperson for the traditional chiefs and religious leaders of the Hopi Independent Nation. He was recognized as an eloquent and persuasive advocate not only for indigenous rights, but also for indigenizing the rules and values that govern or do not govern protection for what we call the environment. And these were some remarks that he made in 1976 at the UN Habitat Forum in Vancouver. Now, I was not there. I also wasn't there at Hauteville in 1962. But this was reprinted in Cultural Survival Quarterly in 2009. And this is an excerpt from his words. The time has come to join in meaningful action. Destruction of all land and life is taking place and accelerating at a rapid pace. Our native land is continuing to be torn apart and raped of its sacredness by the corporate powers for this nation. We do have an alternative to this. The time is right now. Later will be too late. Native peoples must return to the spiritual path as one to cure and halt and heal our Mother Earth. We are not asking the United Nations for help in a material way. We are, according to Hopi prophecy, simply trying to inform the world of what is going to happen if the destruction of the earth and its original peoples continues as it is known by our religious Hopi leaders. We came to this land after asking permission from the Great Spirit Masao. After obtaining his permission, we came and settled with him on this land. He showed us the continent. He gave us sacred stone tablets, religious instructions, warnings, and prophecies. He marked out the boundaries for each group on the continent, after which each group was given an individualized life plan with certain spiritual and religious beliefs. And Kaden referred to one of those earlier. The way to worship, to live, the food to eat, the language to speak. He ended warning the United States and United Nations should understand that it cannot bring about peace and harmony or the good life in the world if it does not correct the wrongdoings going on within the American continent. 1962 and 1976, each one of these spokespersons said, this is the time, okay, we have to stop what's going on now. Okay, how many decades removed are we from these warnings? And how much more time do we have? Half a century later, have the wrongs been corrected? No. Maybe there have been some corrections, but there is still a long way to go. Is the world more or less weaponized now than it was 40 years ago? Are people still killing, lying, stealing, robbing for material gain? Well, ask the Mikisew Cree and Athabasca Chippewayan First Nations, who are battling tar sands mining. Ask the Lubicon Cree, who are trying to stop oil fracking on their land. Ask the Kawa Shoshone, who were evicted from their land 75 years ago when the U.S. government expanded its military arsenal in southern Nevada. Indigenous advocates say that there are more than 1 billion persons who could present themselves as indigenous or are regarded as such by their neighbors or by nearby governments. More importantly, these billion people live in probably 500,000, maybe 1 million, different communities and settlements that are among the most remote, isolated, undeveloped places in the world. Why are they undeveloped? Because people in these communities are intensely localized. They know and honor the kin relations that connect them with all living things with whom they are in contact, whether it is a mountain or whether it is the Seven Sisters. They know and appreciate the weather patterns, the cycles of comings and going, the living and dying that make these places breathing resilient ecological communities. These are small-scale societies that may be connected with one another over large regions, but do not pretend to undertake huge projects that divert or waste water, overturn miles of ground cover, extract tons of minerals that require huge amounts of energy to process, and result in acres and acres of toxic land, water, and air pollution. The developer world says, you're not using our resources. We'll come around and use them for you. The political power brokers of the nation states say, what you need are big weapon protection. We'll impose that on you. The only response the developer world and the nation state power wielders begin to understand is this land is sacred. Because sacred does ring some bells in the Euro-Christian consciousness. And so the indigenous can say, we thought you embraced religious freedom. If non-aggrandizement, peaceful coexistence, ecological sustainability, and the sovereignty of the indigenous has to be translated into the religious jargon that the intruders and usurpers brought along with them, then let us indeed embrace the prophecies and instructions from what is presented to us as the Great Spirit and what Haudenosaunee Oren Lyons has proposed. And that is that all the earth is sacred, which means it all has to be protected. And if this is, if David and Monongah and Thomas Bong out there were predicting 40, 50 years ago that we needed to do something now, which was then, we really need to do something now. And it is in the interest of the entire world to follow the lead of indigenous peoples, not just because they're indigenous, but because they know what they're talking about and they have known what they've been talking about for eons. And so follow their lead, declare the earth sacred, and say no more, quote, development, read exploitation, aggrandizement. We did that in 10 minutes.
Now, it's my understanding we had a 2-hour block, so we're pretty much right on time, right? And so is there anything more you wanted to say beyond that passionate?
Sorry, that's it for now. I will come back to what Andy said about indigenizing and decolonizing. We all have to do that. We have to decolonize ourselves, and we have to promote the indigenization of the earth. There's a Canadian scholar named Peter Harries Jones who has written about reflexive traditionalism in contrast to another concept, reflexive modernism or modernization, in which modernization simply feeds more modernization. And he calls for reflexive traditionalism, in which more traditionalism will feed more traditionalism. In this case, we're talking about the traditionalism of the indigenous peoples of what we call Native North America.
Great, thank you all. And shall we open it up to some conversation?